Few cases of alleged alien abduction have garnered as much public interest as the Travis Walton case of 1975. In an event witnessed by 6 friends and co-workers, Walton was abducted into a saucer-shaped craft and deposited back outside of his hometown 5 days later. Despite the efforts of police and journalists to discredit the bizarre narrative, neither Walton nor any of his co-workers have ever admitted to having perpetrated a hoax. The case remains one of the most credible and fascinating abduction accounts on record, and one of the few to involve consciously recalled memories of the witness's terrifying experience aboard the mysterious craft. In 1975, 22-year-old Travis Walton was working as a logger under the supervision of his longtime friend, Mike Rogers, a contractor with the U.S. Forest Service. There were 7 men on the crew, including Walton and Rogers, all of whom lived in the small town of Snowflake, Arizona. Around 6 p.m. on November 5th, following a normal day on the job, the men shut down for the night and piled into Rogers' truck for the drive back home. Along the way, they were alerted to the presence of a bright light peeking through the trees. Thinking it was a crashed plane, the men drove over in its direction, only to realize that it was something far more shocking. The light belonged to what the men identified as a classic flying saucer, approximately 15 to 20 feet in diameter and 8 feet in height. It was hovering in the air an estimated 15 feet off the ground. It glowed with a golden light that poured out from evenly spaced panels around its surface, each of which was divided by strips of dull silver. It hung motionless in the air and made no sound at all. Walton leapt out of the truck and ran up for a closer look. As his co-workers shouted at him to get back in the vehicle, a cacophony of mechanical sounds came from the craft, and it began to wobble erratically on its axis. As Walton crouched in fear, a bright blue-green beam of light shot from the craft, sending him flying through the air and rendering him unconscious. His co-workers flew into a panic, prompting Rogers to start the truck and drive away. However, when the men realized that the saucer had not followed them from the site, Rogers informed the men that he was turning the truck around and driving back to the scene of the encounter. When they got there, however, they found no trace of either Walton or the UFO. Realizing there was nothing left they could do, the men contacted police. Local Sheriff Marlon Gillespie drove out to the scene with another officer, and together with 3 of the loggers, performed a more thorough search of the area. Again, they found nothing. In the absence of any corroborating evidence, Sheriff Gillespie began to suspect that the men had simply fabricated the story in order to conceal a homicide or some other incident. As the search continued, the police sought evidence of a hoax. In the following days, all 6 loggers underwent extensive police questioning. All were subjected to polygraph tests at the hand of Cy Gilson, an experienced administrator with the Arizona Department of Public Safety. Although Gilson was unable to complete one of the men's tests, he determined that all others were telling the truth. He was so confident in his analysis, which afforded him a rare opportunity to test 6 different accounts of the same event, that he claimed that he had proved the men's sincerity. Just as the police department began to ease up on their interrogation of the 6 loggers, Walton suddenly and mysteriously reappeared. Regaining consciousness in the middle of a road outside of Heber, Arizona, Walton was able to watch a silver saucer-shaped UFO hovering over the road in front of him before shooting off into the air without any sound at all. Walton stumbled to a payphone and called his brother-in-law, who, along with Walton's brother Dwayne, drove out to pick him up. Believing that he had only been gone a few hours, Walton was surprised to realize that 5 days had passed since his abduction. He was able to recall little more than an hour of what had transpired in those 5 days. Walton claimed to have slowly regained consciousness on a raised table surrounded by 3 humanoid creatures. All were less than 5 feet tall with gray skin, large bald heads, and enormous brown eyes. Disturbed by the creature's eerie gaze, Walton leapt off the table and threatened them with a glass-like cylinder he found nearby. Eventually, the creatures backed away and left the room. Walton escaped down a hallway that led him to a spherical room with nothing but an empty, high-backed chair in the center. After sitting in the chair, a pattern of stars appeared around the room, much in the same way that a view of the night sky is projected onto the ceiling of a planetarium. As he pushed a lever on the arm of the chair, the stars slowly rotated around him. Not knowing what he was doing, and feeling dizzied by the rotating effect of the stars, Walton left the chair and looked for a way out of the room. At that point, a door opened, bearing a muscular, human-looking male in a blue jumpsuit and helmet. Walton stated that the man's only peculiar features were his eyes, which were much larger than average, and tinted with a golden hue. Though Walton asked him many questions, the man only grinned, and motioned for Walton to follow him through a hallway and down a ramp that led them outside the saucer-shaped craft and into a giant hangar-like room. The man led Travis into another room, where 3 more human-looking beings took him by the arm and laid him down on a table. Before he could fight back, they set what appeared to be an oxygen mask over his mouth, and he quickly passed out. It was Walton's last encounter with the beings before waking up on the highway outside of Heber. Although Walton would later undergo regressive hypnosis, he was unable to recall any further details of his missing 5 days. His case remains a rare example of an alleged alien abduction in which all of the abductees' salvaged memories were recalled without the use of hypnosis. In the weeks after his return, Walton became the subject of a growing public controversy. Sheriff Gillespie was still skeptical of the loggers' stories, and along with the National Enquirer, a tabloid magazine that had taken an interest in the case, requested that Walton undergo a polygraph. After failing one performed under dubious circumstances, he passed a second, and then a third after that. Nevertheless, the initial polygraph, which Walton had initially tried to suppress, would become a particular source of embarrassment after it was leaked to the press. However, despite repeated attempts from multiple parties to catch Walton in a lie, no evidence has ever emerged to suggest that any of the loggers from Snowflake, Arizona, had perpetrated a hoax. The Travis Walton abduction has earned a privileged place in UFO lore. It is the only widely publicized abduction event to involve 6 corroborating witnesses, whose stories stood up to the scrutiny of intense police questioning and professional polygraph testing. In a recent episode of Sci-Fi's Paranormal Witness, all 7 men were reunited to recount their stories, many of them for the first time on camera. All of them remain deeply affected by the incident and continue to stand by their account of events. Walton went on to publish a book about his encounter, which served as the basis for the 1993 feature film Fire in the Sky. Although the film's narrative deviated significantly from that which Walton had established, it contributed greatly to entrenching this fascinating abduction account in popular culture. For his part, Walton has served as somewhat of a reluctant hero in the UFO community, making occasional appearances at conferences to share his story and insights. Nevertheless, he insists that the event remains a negative one in his life, and that he wishes he had never left the truck the night he was abducted. His trauma and regret are both similar themes in the lives of abductees, the majority of whom were unwilling participants in a wholly mystifying and deeply disturbing experience that changed their lives forever.